In the 41st millennium, gods are either corpses enthroned in gold, demons screaming from the warp, or Xenos abominations demanding blood sacrifice. The concept of a god who walks among mortals as their champion, who wields divine power without demanding worship, is not merely foreign, it is heretical. Yet on the embattled forge world of Metallica 7th, as Chaos cultists breached the outer Manufactorum walls, reality itself tore open and delivered something the Imperium had no protocol to comprehend. The sky split. Not with the pustulant wrongness of a warp rift, nor the geometric precision of a webway gate. This was something else, a bifurcating cascade of rainbow light that screamed across spectrums human eyes were never meant to perceive. Auspex arrays across the Forge world's defensive perimeter shrieked warnings, then exploded in showers of sparks. Tech priests monitoring the phenomenon collapsed, bleeding from their augmetic ports as their machine spirits went temporarily mad with incomprehensible data. Through the breach fell a figure wreathed in lightning. Thor Odinson, god of thunder and prince of Asgard, had been traveling the Bifrost when something went catastrophically wrong. One moment he stood in the Rainbow Bridge's transit corridor, Stormbreaker humming with barely contained power in his grip. The next, reality convulsed. The Bifrost, ancient Asgardian technology that bent space itself, met something it had never encountered before. The roiling insanity of the Immaterium, that psychic hellscape the people of this universe called the Warp. The collision was apocalyptic. Thor hit the ferrocrete of Metallica 7's primary landing platform at terminal velocity, Stormbreaker first. The impact crater measured 40 meters across. Lightning arced outward in every direction, fusing sand into glass, overloading power conduits, and temporarily restoring function to 36 servitors whose behavioral inhibitors had failed months ago. For exactly 7 seconds, every electrical system within a kilometer radius pulsed in perfect synchronization with the Thunder God's heartbeat. Then silence. Acrid smoke, the taste of ozone so thick it burned. Thor rose from the crater, shaking stone dust from his hair and immediately assessing his situation with a warrior's trained eye. His armor, gleaming Asgardian steel and leather, was intact. Stormbreaker pulsed with familiar power in his hand, though something felt different. Wrong. The weapon's connection to the Bifrost, that cosmic tether that had always hummed in the back of his mind, was gone. Severed. He was stranded. The sky above was the color of old blood, choked with industrial smog and the characteristic crimson haze of a world perpetually on the edge of catastrophe. Massive spires punctured the horizon, not the golden towers of Asgard or even the gleaming skyscrapers of Midgard, but brutal Gothic architecture that seemed designed to inspire dread rather than hope. Everything was oversized, over-ornamented with skulls and eagles and scriptures he couldn't read. By Odin's beard, Thor muttered, lightning crackling along his forearms as his body instinctively drew power to defend itself. Where in the 9 realms am I? The answer came in the form of weapons fire. Las beams, though Thor had no name for them yet, slashed through the smoke. Dozens of them, converging on his position from fortified emplacements surrounding the landing platform. Red targeting beams painted his chest. A voice, augmented by crackling Vox speakers, boomed across the platform in a language Thor's Allspeak should have translated instantly. Instead, he got fragments, impressions, emotional context rather than precise words. Threat, unknown, purge, Emperor's mercy. Thor raised Stormbreaker, and the sky answered. Lightning hammered down from the blood-red clouds, not striking him but forming a barrier, a cage of electricity that vaporized incoming last fire before it could touch him. The thunder that followed shook the entire platform, cracking ferrocrete and triggering seismic alarms across 3 districts. Thor didn't attack. Not yet. These were soldiers, following orders, defending their home. He knew that posture, that discipline. He'd commanded such warriors for over a millennium. "I mean no harm," he shouted, voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of a king. "I am Thor Odinson of Asgard. I seek parley with your leaders." The last fire intensified. A new sound joined the cacophony, the thunderous report of bolt weapons. Thor's eyes widened as he saw the rounds, massive compared to any projectile weapon he knew from Midgard, each one exploding on impact with the ferrocrete around him. These weren't warning shots. These were designed to kill, to obliterate, to leave nothing but paste. One bolt round struck his pauldron. The explosive detonation would have removed the arm of any mortal warrior. Thor staggered, more from surprise than pain, and felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries, genuine concern for his physical safety. Whatever these weapons were, they weren't toys. Through the smoke emerged figures that made Thor's warrior instincts scream warnings. Giants in armor, each standing over 7 feet tall, moving with purpose and precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. Their armor was ceramite, though again, Thor didn't know the word, painted in the blue and white of the Ultramarines chapter. Their weapons tracked his movements with professional efficiency. The lead warrior's helmet speakers crackled. "Identify yourself, Xenos. You have 5 seconds before we purge you in the Emperor's name." Thor's grip tightened on Stormbreaker. These warriors were magnificent, engineered for war in a way that reminded him of the Einherjar, Asgard's elite. But there was something missing in their voices. No curiosity, no hesitation. Only absolute certainty that they were righteous and he was a threat. "I am no Xenos," Thor said carefully, letting the lightning around him dim slightly, a gesture of peace. "I am Asgardian, a traveler displaced by forces beyond my control. I would speak with whoever commands this world." "There is only the Emperor's will," the Space Marine replied, "and his will is clear. Unknown entities manifesting through anomalous means are to be destroyed without hesitation." The bolt guns rose. Thor's lightning exploded outward, not to kill, but to disarm. Carefully targeted strikes that superheat weapon barrels, fused firing mechanisms, forced the Space Marines to drop their bolt guns or risk having them explode in their hands. It was a trick he'd perfected fighting Midgard's Hydra forces, precision application of overwhelming power. Non-lethal. Honorable. The Space Marines didn't even pause. They drew combat blades and charged. Thor met the first warrior with Stormbreaker's haft, deflecting a chainsword strike that would have bisected a tank. The blade's teeth screamed against Uru metal and lost, shattering in a spray of ceramite fragments. Thor spun, using the warrior's momentum against him, and delivered a calculated blow to the helmet that actually dented, the ceramite and sent the Space Marine crashing into his battle brothers. "Impressive," Thor admitted, breathing heavily. Not from exhaustion, but from exhilaration. "You fight well, but I have no desire to harm you further." They kept coming. For 23 seconds, Thor fought the most skilled warriors he'd encountered since Thanos' elite guard. They moved like a single organism, covering each other's angles, adapting to his fighting style with frightening speed. But they were still mortal. Enhanced, certainly, but mortal. And he was a god of Asgard with 1,500 years of combat experience. Thor caught the last standing Space Marine by the gorget and lifted him one-handed. Stormbreaker pressed against the warrior's chest plate, but not penetrating. "Enough. I do not wish to kill you, warrior, but I will defend myself if forced. Take me to your commander. Let us speak as soldiers rather than foes." The Space Marine's helmet speakers emitted what might have been a laugh. "The Inquisition will peel the truth from your alien mind, creature. If you have a soul, they will burn it. If you have secrets, they will tear them free. You should have died here. The Inquisition? Thor's brow furrowed. What manner of... The world exploded in white light. Teleportarium technology, though Thor couldn't know the term, ripped him from the landing platform mid-sentence. His last impression before reality twisted inside out was of more ships descending through the bloody sky, their hulls marked with the symbol that would come to define his experience in this universe. A stylized eye, wrapped in laurels and chains, icon of the holy ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition. When the light faded, Thor stood in a very different place, a chamber of black stone and guttering candles, where servo skulls floated like ghastly decorations and the air tasted of incense and human suffering. Restraint fields crackled to life around him, not fast enough to catch Stormbreaker, which he kept firmly in hand, but enough to demonstrate he was now a prisoner. Seated on a throne of twisted metal and prayer parchments, an aged human in elaborate robes studied him with eyes that had witnessed horrors Thor could only imagine. "Welcome, anomaly," Inquisitor Eisenhorn said, his voice dry as parchment and twice as cold. "Let us discover what you truly are." The interrogation chamber existed in a state of perpetual twilight, lit only by candles whose flames never flickered despite the recycled air currents. Thor's Asgardian senses, honed over millennia, cataloged everything. 37 servo skulls maintaining overwatch positions, each one equipped with weapons or recording devices. Psychic dampening fields humming at frequencies that made his teeth ache. Hidden alcoves where he suspected more guards waited. And the man himself, Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn, whose aged face bore the weight of centuries spent hunting humanity's enemies. "Your compliance fields are impressive," Thor said conversationally, testing the restraints with subtle movements. The energy barriers sparked but held. Asgard uses similar technology for containing particularly dangerous prisoners, though ours hum in A-flat rather than this discordant drone. Eisenhorn's expression didn't change. "You speak Gothic. The language adapts to your tongue, or your mind adapts to ours. Either suggests psyker capability or Xenos biomanipulation. Both are grounds for immediate execution." He gestured, and one of the servo skulls descended, its mechanical eye sockets glowing with pale green light as it scanned Thor's biological signature. "Yet you resist our auspex. Your cellular structure refuses proper analysis. Your energy signature." He paused and for the first time showed something other than cold professionalism. Unease. "It reads simultaneously as massive psychic potential and complete null presence. Impossible." "I am Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder and protector of Asgard," Thor replied with the patient dignity of someone who'd endured similar interrogations from S.H.I.E.L.D., the Kree Empire, and once memorably from the Guardians of the Galaxy. "I am neither Psyker nor Xenos by your definitions, though I suspect those terms refer to sorcerers and alien species. I am Asgardian, one of the 9 realms' eldest races. We were traveling the stars when your ancestors still dwelt in caves." "Heresy," Eisenhorn said flatly. "Humanity is the Emperor's chosen species. All others are either tools to be exploited or threats to be eliminated. Your claims of divinity compound your offense. There is only one God Emperor, and he sits enthroned on Terra, sacrificing 10,000 Psykers daily to maintain the Astronomicon that guides humanity through the warp." Thor's expression darkened. 10,000 souls, daily? What manner of god demands such sacrifice?" "The God Emperor protects," Eisenhorn said, and for the first time, Thor heard something in the Inquisitor's voice that chilled him more than the threats. Absolute faith. "His sacrifice sustains our species. Every world we hold, every ship that traverses the immaterium, every human soul that survives another day, owes their existence to his divine will. What are 10,000 psychers, mutants who would otherwise become gateways for demonic incursion, compared to the trillions he shields from annihilation? Demons. Thor's mind raced, connecting fragments. The wrongness of the rift that had pulled him here. The way his connection to the Bifrost had been severed not by technology, but by something that felt like corruption. Like the touch of Surtur's flame, or the Infinity Stone's reality-warping power. You speak of entities from another dimension, creatures of chaos and malevolence. The warp, Eisenhorn confirmed, leaning forward with sudden intensity. The Immaterium, the Sea of Souls. It has many names, and yes, it teems with horrors that would devour humanity's psychic essence given the slightest opportunity. Tell me, Anomaly, when you traversed the barrier between realities, what did you feel? Thor considered lying, then dismissed the thought. Deception had never been his strength, and something about this conversation felt crucial. Hunger, he said quietly. Malevolence beyond anything I've encountered in 15 centuries of battle. The Bifrost, our method of instantaneous travel, intersected with something that shouldn't exist. Something that tried to claw its way into the transit corridor. The Bifrost's defenses held, but the collision displaced me. Here. Eisenhorn's fingers steepled. The Bifrost, describe it. Ancient technology created by Asgard's greatest minds, capable of opening stable pathways through space itself. It draws on cosmic energies and operates on principles your science might classify as heretic, Eisenhorn interrupted. Forbidden technology not sanctioned by the Omnissiah or Mars's Forge Masters, yet another crime. Despite the words, his tone had shifted from accusatory to analytical. You claim no allegiance to the ruinous powers. You bear no marks of chaos corruption? I know nothing of your chaos, Thor said firmly, but I have fought corruption before. The Dark Elves sought to return the universe to primordial darkness. Hela, goddess of death, tried to conquer the 9 realms through necromancy and fear. Thanos wielded the Infinity Stones to erase half of all life with a thought. I have stood against extinction-level threats and won. If your demons threaten innocent lives, then I would stand against them as well. One of the servo skulls chimed urgently. Eisenhorn glanced at the data streaming across his retinal display and frowned. Your physiological responses indicate truth, yet that should be impossible. My lie detection systems are calibrated to pierce any deception. He stood, pacing slowly around Thor's restraint field. You present a paradox. Clearly superhuman capabilities, evident resistance to psychic probing. Claims of divinity that would normally merit immediate execution, yet no trace of warp taint. No Xenos genetic markers matching any cataloged species. And most troubling, he stopped directly in front of Thor. You show genuine moral conviction when speaking of protecting innocence. Such idealism rarely survives first contact with the 41st millennium's realities. Then perhaps your millennium needs more idealism, Thor said. Eisenhorn actually smiled, a thin, bitter expression. 5 hours ago, cultists of the Blood God breached Metallica 7's outer defenses. They wear the flayed skins of their victims as cloaks. They kill not for tactical advantage, but for the joy of watching souls drain. They would sacrifice this world's 6 billion inhabitants to summon a demon prince capable of rendering this entire sector uninhabitable. The Ultramarines you fought, they were preparing to repel the next wave when you manifested. Every moment they wasted subduing you, civilians died screaming. He leaned closer. Still feel idealistic? Thor met his gaze steadily. Yes, because idealism without action is fantasy, but action without idealism is mere butchery. You defend your people, I respect that. But if you believe the only choice is between your Emperor's brutal efficiency and demons' genocide, then you've already surrendered the very humanity you claim to protect. The chamber fell silent except for the servo skull's mechanical whirring. Fascinating, Eisenhorn murmured. You actually believe that? He tapped a command into his wrist-mounted data slate. The restraint fields dimmed, but didn't deactivate. Let me show you something. Thor Odinson, who claims godhood. The chamber's walls flickered, and suddenly Thor saw through vid-capture feeds. The Forge world's surface. Except now, the earlier battlefield he'd crashed into had transformed into an abattoir. Bodies, human bodies, had been arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Blood flowed in channels that formed symbols Thor's Allspeak refused to translate, as though the very language itself was toxic. And at the center, cultists screamed prayers to entities that made the frost giants look like benevolent neighbors. These were factory workers yesterday, Eisenhorn narrated dispassionately. Loyal servants of the Omnissiah. They produced lasguns for the Imperial Guard. Then a single corrupted data hymnal reached the manufacturum's Vox network. One exposure to Chaos's whispers, and within 3 hours, they'd murdered their overseers and begun the rituals you see. The infection spreads exponentially. By tomorrow, if unchecked, the entire Forge world falls. By next week, the system. By next month, the sector. Thor's jaw clenched. And your solution? Exterminatus if necessary. Cyclonic torpedoes that boil the atmosphere and crack the planet's crust. 6 billion dead to prevent 60 billion more from suffering the same corruption. Eisenhorn's voice carried no satisfaction, only grim acceptance. This is the 41st millennium, anomaly. There are no good choices, only degrees of catastrophic failure. There is always another choice, Thor said, and lightning began to build around Stormbreaker despite the dampening fields. Not attacking, just existing, raw power responding to its wielder's determination. I have seen darkness before, true darkness. And I have learned that the moment you accept atrocity as necessity is the moment you become what you claim to fight. The restraint fields shrieked as Thor's power pushed against them. Not breaking free, not yet, but making a point. Eisenhorn's hand moved toward his plasma pistol, then stopped. You could escape, the Inquisitor observed. You're testing your limits, and you've realized these fields won't hold you if you truly exert yourself, yet you remain. Why? Because you're not my enemy, Thor said simply. You're afraid. Afraid for your people. Afraid that one mistake will damn billions. I understand that fear. I felt it when Ragnarok threatened Asgard, when Hela's armies marched, when Thanos' ships filled the sky. But fear-driven decisions are rarely wise ones. He allowed the lightning to fade. Release me. Let me face these cultists you speak of. If they threaten innocence, I will stop them. No cyclonic torpedoes, no billions dead. Just one god of thunder doing what he does best. And if you fail, Eisenhorn challenged. If you fall to corruption, if you prove to be Chaos's greatest trick, then you can say you were right to doubt me, Thor replied. But give me the chance to prove otherwise. I am Thor, god of thunder. I do not break promises, and I promise you this. Those cultists will not complete their ritual. On my honor as an Avenger and Prince of Asgard. Eisenhorn studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. Avenger, what a quaint title. Very well, Thor Odinson. I will grant you this opportunity, though it damns me if you fail. But understand, his expression hardened. Succeed or fail, you remain my prisoner afterward. You are an anomaly in a universe that abhors anomalies. Your ultimate fate lies with the High Lords of Terra and the Emperor's will. This is merely a stay of execution, not a pardon." "Agreed," Thor said immediately. The restraint fields dropped. Thor rolled his shoulders, feeling Stormbreaker's familiar weight, and smiled. The warrior's smile he'd worn before every battle from Jotunheim to Svartalfheim to Wakanda. "Now then," he said, "show me where these cultists defile your world. It's time they learned that some storms cannot be corrupted." The Valkyrie gunship descended through Metallica 7's polluted atmosphere, with Thor secured in the troop compartment alongside a kill team of Tempestus Scions, the Imperium's elite special forces. Unlike the Space Marines he'd fought earlier, these were baseline humans augmented only by superior training and equipment. Yet they carried themselves with the same lethal competence, checking weapons and reviewing tactical data with mechanical precision. Thor watched them work, noting how they avoided eye contact with him. Not from fear, he realized, but from doctrine. They'd been ordered to transport the anomaly, and so they would. But personal interaction remained forbidden until Inquisitor Eisenhorn declared him ally or enemy. It reminded him uncomfortably of how the Warriors 3 had treated him during his exile, dutiful but distant. Approaching the ritual site, the pilot's voice crackled through the Vox. "Massive warp signatures detected. Recommend immediate withdrawal and orbital bombardment." "Negative," Eisenhorn's voice responded from the Inquisitorial command ship in high orbit. "Deploy the asset. All units maintain perimeter. Prevent any cultist escape, but do not interfere with the anomaly's actions unless it shows signs of corruption." The asset. Thor's mouth quirked in dark amusement. He'd been called many things: hero, tyrant, worthy, unworthy, but never simply the asset. The Valkyrie's rear ramp dropped, and Thor saw the ritual site properly for the first time. The Manufactorum district had been transformed into a charnel cathedral. Massive furnaces that once forged weapons now belched crimson flames that burned at the temperatures no promethium fuel could produce. The bodies Eisenhorn had shown him were merely the foundation. Thousands more had been added, arranged in spiraling patterns that drew the eye toward a central altar where reality itself seemed to bleed. The sky directly above the site had torn open, revealing something beyond. Not space, not void, but a roiling dimension of impossible colors and screaming faces. The warp. Thor could feel it now, pressing against reality like an infected wound trying to burst. The sensation was viscerally wrong, similar to the reality-warping power of the ether or the Mind Stone's consciousness violation, but infinitely worse. This wasn't just power, it was corruption given form, malevolence with intention. And the cultists themselves, they had been human once. Thor's Asgardian perception could still detect the remnants of baseline mortality beneath the mutations. But chaos had rewritten them into something else. Some had grown extra limbs that ended in blade bone protrusions. Others wept blood from eyes that had multiplied across their faces. Their chants rose in harmonies that human vocal cords shouldn't produce, praising entities whose names made Thor's all-speak translation. Abilities falter and rebel. At the ritual's center stood their leader, a former fabricator locum, according to the tactical brief, now transformed into something that merged flesh with corrupted machinery. Mechadendrites writhed from her back like serpents, each tipped with flaying implements. Her face had split vertically, revealing cogitator components fused directly into brain tissue that pulsed with warp energy. "Blood for the blood god," she shrieked, and the cultists responded with orgasmic fervor. "Skulls for the Skull Throne." Thor had heard enough. He stepped from the Valkyrie's ramp and simply dropped, plummeting 200 meters to the Manufactorum floor with Stormbreaker held high. The impact cratered Ferrocrete and sent cultists flying like leaves before a storm. Lightning exploded outward in a dome, and for the first time since arriving in this universe, Thor allowed himself to truly cut loose. Thunder rolled across the Forge world with enough force to trigger seismic sensors 3 cities away. The cultists charged him immediately, showing neither fear nor tactical sense, only bloodlust. Thor met them with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd fought armies single-handedly. Stormbreaker sang through the air, each swing precisely measured. He crushed skulls, shattered spines, sent corrupted bodies flying into each other with calculated force. Never cruel, never sadistic, just brutally effective. These were no longer the people they'd been, and mercy here meant allowing them to complete their ritual and doom billions. But something was wrong. Every cultist he killed, every body that hit the ground, their blood flowed toward the ritual site instead of pooling naturally. The geometric patterns weren't just decoration, they were channels, conduits, feeding the tear in reality with every death. Thor realized with sickening clarity that he was helping them. "Clever," he growled, pulling back before decapitating another cultist. "You knew someone would come, knew they'd fight, and every death feeds your summoning." The corrupted fabricator Locum laughed, the sound echoing from both her mutated throat and the Vox speakers still embedded in her chest. "The Architect of Fate sees all paths, Thunder Thing. You kill us, we ascend. You spare us, we complete the ritual. There is no victory, only service to the powers." Thor's eyes crackled with lightning. "You mistake me for someone who accepts binary choices." He raised Stormbreaker toward the bleeding sky and called the storm. Not the localized lightning he'd been using. That was parlor tricks, battlefield control. This was the full fury of a thunder god who'd held open the Bifrost against the void's collapse, who'd reignited a dying star with his bare hands, who'd channeled the full power of the Odin Force during Ragnarok itself. Yes, the warp interfered with his connection to Asgard's cosmic energies. Yes, this universe's laws operated differently. But storm systems were storm systems, and Thor had been manipulating weather patterns since before this world's sun ignited. The blood-red sky turned black with thunderheads that formed in seconds rather than hours. Wind howled through the manufactorum, carrying away the tainted smoke and chaos-corrupted vapors. And then the lightning came, not striking down, but forming a web, a cage of electricity that enclosed the entire ritual site. "What? What are you doing?" the fabricator Locum screeched, her confidence cracking. "Electromagnetic containment," Thor said, walking calmly toward her as his lightning cage pulsed and tightened. "Your ritual requires the warp's energy to flow freely into this dimension. But warp energy, for all its chaotic properties, still interacts with electromagnetic fields. I can feel it distorting around my lightning. So I'm creating a Faraday cage. Your precious tear in reality can scream all it wants, but the energy won't reach your altar." It wasn't perfect. The warp was too alien, too fundamentally wrong, to be completely blocked by physical forces. But Thor didn't need perfection. He just needed to disrupt the ritual long enough to neutralize the source. The cultists realized what was happening and surged toward him en masse, abandoning all pretense of coordination in favor of overwhelming numbers. Thor planted Stormbreaker point first into the ground and met them with fists alone. Each punch carried the force of a thunderbolt, delivered with the precision of 15 centuries combat experience. He wove through them like a dancer, redirecting attacks, using their momentum against them, incapacitating rather than killing wherever possible. Not out of mercy, these cultists were beyond saving, but out of tactical necessity. Every death fed the ritual, every incapacitation delayed it. The fabricator locum shrieked commands in languages that predated human civilization, and the tear in reality pulsed with frustrated hunger. Something massive pressed against the barrier between dimensions, desperate to break through. Thor caught a glimpse of it, a form composed of brass and bone and infinite malice, a demon of the blood god straining against the weakening veil. "Not today," Thor said, and channeled every amp of electrical power in the surrounding Manufactorum district into his lightning cage. Power grids exploded, generators overloaded. Every conductive surface within 2 kilometers became a capacitor for Thor's will. The electromagnetic cage blazed so bright it turned night into artificial day, and the tear in reality, starved of the energy needed to maintain cohesion, began to collapse. The demon's scream of rage echoed not through air, but through psychic space, a sound that made servitors collapse across the Forge world and sent astropaths into seizures. But the tear shrank, inch by agonizing inch, reality reasserting itself against the warp's intrusion. The fabricator locum made her final, desperate play. Her mechadendrites lashed out, each one dripping with corrupted machine oil that hissed and smoked against Thor's skin. They were fast, inhumanly fast, and several struck home, wrapping around his arms and chest. Razor edges bit deep, finding gaps in Asgardian durability through sheer persistence and chaos-enhanced strength. Thor grunted in pain but didn't falter. Instead, he surged forward, grappling with the corrupted tech priest even as her blades carved shallow wounds across his torso. They crashed through a half-melted ferrocrete wall, wrestling in a tangle of flesh and metal. "You cannot win," she shrieked in his face, her split-skull visage inches from his own. "The warp is eternal. Your Emperor thing sits rotting on his throne, and the 4 powers grow stronger every day. This world falls tonight, or tomorrow, or next year, but it will fall." "Perhaps," Thor said, and headbutted her with enough force to crater her corrupted skull plating. "But not by you." He ripped the mechadendrites from his chest, ignoring the pain, and hurled her across the ritual chamber. She crashed into her own altar, and the irony wasn't lost on Thor. The structure collapsed, crushing her beneath tons of desecrated stone and twisted metal. The tear in reality, now completely starved of directed energy, collapsed with a sound like reality itself, sighing in relief. Silence fell across the Manufactorum district. Cultists, their connection to the warp suddenly severed, collapsed where they stood, some dead from the shock, others merely catatonic. Thor stood amid the carnage, breathing heavily, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer concentration required to maintain electromagnetic containment while fighting hand to hand. He'd won. The ritual was broken. The demon remained imprisoned in the warp. 6 billion lives saved. But as he retrieved Stormbreaker and began walking toward the extraction zone, Thor couldn't shake the fabricator locum's final words. "This world falls tonight, or tomorrow, or next year. But it will fall. How many other worlds faced similar threats? How many other rituals progressed unchallenged? How vast was the Imperium's empire, and how thin were its defenses spread?" The Valkyrie descended through clearing smoke, and tempestuous scions emerged with weapons trained on him. Not hostile exactly, but wary. Eisenhorn's voice crackled through their vox. "Scan him for corruption. Full spectrum analysis. If he shows even trace warp taint, execute immediately." Thor submitted to their auger arrays and biological scanners without complaint. He'd passed their first test. But as he boarded the transport and saw the way the scions maintained firing solutions on him, even while strapping in, he realized something troubling. In this universe, victory didn't earn trust. It only earned suspicion about how you'd achieved it. The Inquisitorial Fortress Monastery perched on Metallica 7's largest moon like a gargoyle carved from obsidian and paranoia. Its walls bore inscriptions in High Gothic that Thor's Allspeak translated as prayers against corruption, wards against possession, and dire warnings about the price of weakness. Servo skulls patrolled every corridor, their eye sockets glowing with detection. Augurs calibrated to identify chaos taint, Xenos infiltration, and heretical thought patterns. It was, Thor reflected, the architectural equivalent of assuming everyone was guilty until proven otherwise. He'd been sequestered in what Eisenhorn called comfortable accommodations, a sparse chamber with a cot, a data slate containing approved Imperial texts, and exactly zero personal privacy. Surveillance lenses tracked his every movement. Psychic monitoring equipment hummed in the walls, measuring his biometric responses and cataloging his dreams for signs of demonic influence. 3 days had passed since the Manufactorum battle. 3 days of debriefings, medical examinations, theological interrogations, and what Eisenhorn euphemistically called doctrinal education. Thor had been forced to watch historical records of the Imperium's greatest battles, its most devastating defeats, and the horrific consequences of chaos corruption. The recordings were meant to justify the Imperium's brutal methods, to demonstrate why mercy equaled weakness, and why faith in the Emperor must be absolute. Instead, they'd horrified him. Not the battles themselves. Thor had witnessed carnage across 1,000 worlds, but the casual acceptance of atrocity as standard procedure. Entire planetary populations sacrificed because a single cultist went undetected. Worlds burned to ash on suspicion rather than evidence. Billions pressed into service as conscripts, their lifespans measured in weeks once they reached the front lines. And underlying everything, the theological certainty that this was not merely necessary, but righteous. "You're troubled," Eisenhorn observed, entering the chamber without announcement. The Inquisitor carried 2 metal cups containing recaf, the Imperium's bitter approximation of coffee. He offered one to Thor with something approaching courtesy. "The Horus Heresy records disturb you." Thor accepted the cup, noting it was the first genuinely civil gesture anyone had made in 3 days. "I've seen civil wars before. Asgard fought the Dark Elves for centuries. The 9 realms have known brother against brother. But this..." He gestured at the data slate displaying images of space marines butchering each other during humanity's greatest internal conflict. "Your Emperor's own sons betrayed him. Half your space marine legions turned to chaos. Your species nearly tore itself apart 10,000 years ago, and you still haven't recovered." "We endure," Eisenhorn said simply. "That is victory enough in the 41st millennium." "Is it?" Thor challenged. "Because from where I stand, your Imperium is dying by degrees. You lose worlds faster than you can reclaim them. Your Emperor sits comatose on his throne, sustained by daily sacrifices that would make Hela blush. Your people live in squalor and ignorance, forbidden from pursuing knowledge because your Mechanicus declared curiosity itself heretical. This isn't victory, Eisenhorn. This is prolonged defeat." The Inquisitor's expression hardened. "Careful, Anomaly. Such words border on heresy." "Then call me a heretic," Thor said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've been called worse by better. But answer me this. If your Emperor returned tomorrow, fully healed and conscious, do you truly believe he would be proud of what his Imperium has become? Of the Inquisition that burns innocence on suspicion? Of the ecclesiarchy that demands worship of a being who explicitly rejected godhood? Of an empire so consumed by fear that it cannot distinguish between threats and allies?" Silence stretched between them. Then, surprisingly, Eisenhorn sat on the chamber's only chair and took a long drink of recaf. When he spoke, His voice carried a weariness Thor hadn't heard before. "You want honesty? Very well. No, I don't believe the Emperor would be proud. I've studied the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, the Emperor's vision for humanity. He intended an empire of reason and science, secular and enlightened. Instead, we worship him as a god he never claimed to be, burn psychers in his name, despite his efforts to understand and control psychic potential, and enforce dogma over innovation." He looked directly at Thor. "But he is not here to judge us. We are. And every choice we make, every atrocity committed, every world burned, every billion souls sacrificed, is made because the alternative is extinction, not eventual defeat, not gradual decline. Complete extinction." "The warp," Thor said quietly. "The warp," Eisenhorn confirmed. "You faced a minor cult attempting to summon a lesser demon. But imagine that ritual succeeding across 1,000 worlds simultaneously. Imagine the Eye of Terror, a permanent warp rift the size of a solar system, expanding to consume the galaxy. Imagine Chaos Space Marines, once humanity's greatest champions, now leading endless crusades of corruption. Imagine the Tyranids, a xeno-species that consumes entire civilizations to fuel biological evolution, arriving in numbers that blot out stars. Imagine Necrons awakening from 60 million year sleeps with technology that makes our most advanced weapons look like stone knives." He stood pacing to the chamber's narrow viewport overlooking Metallica 7's war-scarred surface. "We are besieged on all sides by extinction-level threats, Thor Odinson. The Imperium survives not through enlightenment or virtue, but through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to die. Every world we hold is a victory. Every generation that survives to breed the next is a triumph. We don't aim for prosperity. We aim for continued existence. That is the reality of the 41st millennium." Thor joined him at the viewport, watching servitors repair damage from the recent cult uprising. "On Midgard, what you would call ancient Earth, I spent time learning from their heroes. Mortals with no divine power, no Asgardian strength, who nonetheless fought impossible odds. I asked one of them, Captain Rogers, how he maintained hope when facing extinction. Do you know what he said?" Eisenhorn glanced at him. "Enlighten me." He said, "The only way to lose is to stop fighting for something better. Not fighting to survive, fighting to make survival worthwhile." Thor's eyes crackled with distant lightning. "Your Imperium fights, yes. But you've forgotten what you're fighting for. You're so consumed with preventing extinction that you've created a civilization barely worth preserving." "Bold words from someone who's been here less than a week," Eisenhorn said, but there was no heat in it. "You think you understand our struggles because you stopped one ritual. You prevented one demon from manifesting. Thor Odinson, there are rituals like that happening on 100 worlds right now. Some we stop, many we don't, and the ones we miss become permanent warp rifts, planets lost forever to chaos, launching points for further corruption." "Then give me the coordinates," Thor said immediately. "I'll stop them." Eisenhorn laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You, one being, however powerful, against the infinite malice of the warp. Even if I believed you capable, even if I trusted your motives completely, you cannot be in 100 places simultaneously. You cannot save everyone, Thor. No one can. That's the lesson this universe teaches. Triage, brutal prioritization, acceptable losses. I refuse to accept that." "Then you'll die disillusioned." Thor turned to face the Inquisitor fully. "Perhaps, but I'd rather die fighting for a better universe than live accepting a worse one. You asked earlier what troubles me about your records. It's not the battles or the losses. It's that your people have stopped asking, 'How do we win?' and started asking, 'How do we delay losing?' That shift, from hope to mere endurance, is more dangerous than any demon. Eisenhorn studied him for a long moment. The Ecclesiarchy has been petitioning for your execution. Did you know? They've reviewed footage of your lightning manipulation, read transcripts of your claims to godhood, and concluded you're either a chaos sorcerer wearing human skin or a Xenos infiltrator. Cardinal Voss personally called for your immediate burning. He paused. I've been delaying their petitions. Why? Because you genuinely believe what you're saying, Eisenhorn admitted. I've interrogated 10,000 heretics, cultists, and traitors. I know deception, I know fanaticism, I know corruption. But you, he shook his head slowly. You're something I've never encountered, a being of immense power who genuinely prioritizes others' welfare over his own gain. It's so alien to this universe's reality that I'm not certain whether you're our greatest asset or our most dangerous blind spot. Then test me further, Thor said. Don't keep me locked in this monastery while your Imperium burns. Deploy me against threats. Let me prove my worth through action, not words. Oh, I intend to, Eisenhorn said, and his smile held no warmth. But understand this. The moment I detect chaos taint, the moment you show corruption, the moment you prioritize your ideology over practical necessity, I will kill you myself. My plasma pistol is loaded with blessed rounds sanctified by the Sisters of Battle. They'll burn through your Asgardian physiology before you can call lightning. I've killed things far more powerful than you when they proved corrupted. Don't give me reason to add you to that list. Thor extended his hand. Then we have an accord, Inquisitor. Use me as your weapon against chaos. I'll prove that power and principle need not be mutually exclusive. Eisenhorn stared at the offered hand for 3 full seconds before clasping it. His grip was firm despite his age, carrying the strength of augmented bones and decades of combat. Very well, Thor Odinson. But know this, I'm assigning you a handler, someone who can monitor you in the field, assess your actions, and execute you if necessary. You'll follow her orders without question. Understood? Who? The chamber door hissed open, and Thor saw his handler for the first time. She wore power armor painted in the distinctive black and white of the Ordo Hereticus, her face marked with purity seals and faith scrolls. A multi-melta weapon mag-locked to her back could vaporize a battle tank. Her eyes, pale gray and utterly pitiless, assessed him the way a butcher evaluates livestock. Battle Sister Helene Kor, Eisenhorn introduced. She's killed more heretics than most regiments see in deployment. She's immune to charm, resistant to psychic manipulation, and has standing orders to reduce you to constituent atoms if you show corruption. You're her assignment now. Helene spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the mechanical precision of a well-maintained weapon. I've read your file, Anomaly. Impressive combat performance, disturbing ideological patterns, high corruption risk. I'll be monitoring your every action. Pray to whatever gods you claim that you're truly incorruptible, because I've burned heroes before. She smiled thinly. The flames smell the same, regardless of intent. Thor looked between Eisenhorn and Helene, understanding the dynamic immediately. They'd given him freedom, but surrounded him with executioners. It was pragmatic, suspicious, and entirely in character for an Inquisition that trusted nothing and no one. I accept your terms, Thor said. When do we begin? Eisenhorn activated his data slate, and a hololithic display materialized, showing a distant world wreathed in warp storms. 6 hours ago, we lost contact with Quintus Primus, an agri-world supporting 3 neighboring systems. Last transmission indicated demonic manifestation. Entire planetary defense force went dark within minutes. We're dispatching a purge fleet to enact exterminados in 30 hours unless the situation is resolved. 30 hours to save an entire world, Thor said. unacceptable. Save it? Helene's laugh was sharp as broken glass. We're not going to save it, Anomaly. We're confirming whether anything remains worth saving. If yes, we destroy the corruption. If no, we destroy the planet. Those are the only outcomes. Thor's hand tightened around Stormbreaker. Then I'll create a third option. The Thunderhawk gunship broke through Quintus Primus's atmosphere with all the grace of a falling anvil, its hull shuddering as warp-corrupted weather patterns battered the armored craft. Thor stood in the troop bay beside battle sister Helene and a squad of 8 Militarum Tempestus operatives, each one checking weapons with the grim efficiency of soldiers who'd accepted they might not survive the next hour. Through the viewport, Thor witnessed a world in its death throes. Quintus Primus had been an agri-world, vast grain fields stretching to every horizon, designed to feed billions across neighboring systems. Now those fields burned with fires that spread against the wind, flames that burned purple and green instead of red and orange. The sky had split in 17 places, each tear bleeding warp energy that twisted reality like wet clay. And across the landscape, things moved. Not human, not anymore. Never born, Helene said, tracking his gaze. Her voice carried no emotion through the Vox speakers built into her power armor helmet. Lesser demons of chaos undivided, individually weak, but they manifest in swarms. Each one is a fragment of the warp's malevolence, given temporary form. Kill the body. The essence returns to the immaterium, but while manifest, they're real enough to tear you apart. How many? Thor asked. Augur scans detected 17,000 before the equipment overloaded, one of the Tempestus sergeants reported. His name was Karis, and his augmetic eye glowed with targeting data. But that was 6 hours ago. Could be double that by now. Each demon that fully manifests can corrupt mortals, creating cultists who then summon more demons. Exponential growth. And the population? 3 million agricultural workers across 6 primary settlements, Helene said flatly. We've detected no Imperial Vox traffic, no distress signals, no survivors attempting evacuation. Probability assessment, total corruption or total casualties. Either way, Exterminatus remains the projected solution. Thor's jaw clenched. No, we find survivors. We establish a safe zone. We hold until reinforcements arrive. There are no reinforcements, Helene countered. Every available ship is committed to the Sabbat Worlds Crusade or defending critical Forge Worlds. We're alone, Anomaly. Accept it. The Thunderhawk shuddered as something massive slammed into its port thruster. Alarms shrieked. The pilot's voice, tight with controlled panic, reported through the Vox. Demon of significant mass just breached our vector. Starboard engine compromised. Emergency landing in 30 seconds. All personnel, brace for impact, Helene commanded, and the Tempestus scions immediately mag-locked their boots to the deck plating. Thor didn't bother. As the Thunderhawk plummeted, he simply raised Stormbreaker and channeled lightning through the craft's hull, using electromagnetic manipulation to slow their descent. Not perfectly. The warp interference made precise control difficult, but enough to transform a catastrophic crash into a merely violent landing. They hit the ground at 60 kilometers per hour, plowing through corrupted grain fields and leaving a 100-meter trench before finally stopping. Thor was first out. Stormbreaker crackling with barely contained power, scanning for immediate threats. He found them. The demons swarmed from every direction, writhing masses of impossible anatomy that hurt to perceive directly. Some had too many limbs, others had none, floating on currents of malevolence. Their faces shifted between humanoid and utterly alien, and their voices spoke in frequencies that bypassed ears entirely, drilling directly into the mind with whispered promises of power, pleasure, and oblivion. "Contact!" Karas shouted, and the Tempestus Scions opened fire. Hot-shot lace guns blazed, each shot calibrated to penetrate power armor. Against the demons, the blessed ammunition burned through warp stuff like holy water on shadow. Demons shrieked, not in pain but in frustration, as their physical forms destabilized and collapsed, sending their essences screaming back into the immaterium. Helene's multi-melta spoke with the voice of a miniature sun, vaporizing entire clusters of Neverborn with each shot. Her power armor's servo motors whined as she moved with efficiency born from decades of demon hunting, never wasting ammunition, never exposing her flanks, maintaining perfect firing discipline. And Thor unleashed the storm. Lightning hammered down from the corrupted sky in a continuous barrage, each bolt guided by his will to strike demon clusters. Thunder rolled across the agri-world with enough force to shatter abandoned grain silos. Wind howled at his command, pushing back the warp-corrupted atmosphere and creating a bubble of breathable air around the crash site. For 90 seconds they held, then something else arrived. The largest warp rift pulsed, and through it stepped a demon that made the Neverborn look like insects. 12 feet tall, its form constructed from brass and molten fury, wielding a blade that wept blood despite never having struck flesh. A bloodletter, lesser champion of Khorne, the blood god, but still vastly more dangerous than the swarm they'd been fighting. It saw Thor and screamed a challenge in a language that predated human evolution. "Fall back," Helene commanded, switching her multi-melta to maximum output. "That's a mid-tier demon. We need a start support too." Thor was already moving. He crossed the distance between himself and the bloodletter in 3 strides, Stormbreaker meeting the demon's hell-forged blade in a collision that created a pressure wave strong enough to flatten corrupted grain for 100 meters in every direction. The bloodletter was strong, far stronger than the Chitauri, stronger than most frost giants, stronger than anything Thor had fought that wasn't Hulk or Thanos. But Thor was the god of thunder, and he'd held his own against the Mad Titan. They dueled across the battlefield, each exchange of blows generating enough force to crater the ground beneath them. The bloodletter fought with the manic aggression of something that knew only war, only slaughter, only the joy of blood spilled. Thor fought with 15 centuries of experience, reading his opponent's patterns, exploiting the demon's predictable bloodlust. Stormbreaker's edge found flesh, or what passed for flesh, in a demon's temporary physical form. The bloodletter howled, not in pain but in rage, and redoubled its assault. Its blade actually scored Thor's armor, drawing Asgardian blood that hissed when it touched the corrupted ground. "Interesting," Thor grunted, blocking another strike. "You're adapting, learning my patterns. Impressive for something that shouldn't think, only kill." The bloodletter's response was another scream, and a faint strike combination that nearly took Thor's head off. Behind them, Helene and the Tempestus Scions maintained a desperate perimeter against endless waves of Neverborn. Ammunition counters ticked towards 0. Hot-shot power packs overheated. One Scion went down, a demon's claws punching through his carapace armor. Helene executed the demon with a point-blank multi-melta shot, but the Scion was already convulsing, corruption racing through his bloodstream. "Purge him," Helene ordered another Scion without hesitation. The soldier, the dying man's own squad mate, placed his last pistol against his brother's temple and pulled the trigger. Thor saw it from the corner of his eye and felt something cold settle in his chest. No time to mourn, no time to honor the fallen, just immediate execution to prevent corruption from spreading. This was the Imperium's way, brutal pragmatism elevated to religious doctrine. He channeled his anger into his next strike. Stormbreaker blazed with lightning, and Thor brought it down on the bloodletter with enough force to split continents. The demon tried to block, but Uru metal forged in a dying star's heart proved superior to even hell-forged brass. The blade shattered, the demon's form destabilized, and with a final scream of rage, the bloodletter dissolved back into the warp. Thor stood panting, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, and surveyed the battlefield. They'd killed hundreds of demons, maybe thousands, but more kept coming. Always more. For every one they destroyed, two seemed to manifest from the warp rifts. "This is futile," Helene said, and Thor heard genuine regret beneath her emotionless delivery. "We can't kill them all. The rifts remain open. Every moment we delay, more manifest. We need to call for exterminatus and evacuate." "No," Thor said. "We close the rifts." "Impossible. Warp rifts this size require massive electromagnetic disruption, precise energy application, and someone stubborn enough to ignore impossible odds," Thor finished. "I've done this before. The Bifrost operates on similar principles, stabilizing pathways through dimensions. These rifts are just inverse Bifrost portals. Unstable, corrupted, but still following fundamental laws of dimensional intersection." He pointed Stormbreaker at the nearest rift. "I can close them, but I need time. Minutes, at least, per rift. And there are 17. Karas checked his chronometer. "We have 6 hours before the Exterminatus fleet arrives. That's 21 minutes per rift," Thor calculated. "Tight, but manageable, if you can hold them off me while I work." Helene's helmet turned toward him, and though he couldn't see her expression, Thor felt her assessment. Finally, she said, "You're either the bravest being I've met, or the most delusional, possibly both." She checked her multi-melta's ammunition counter. "I have 83 shots remaining. Karas." "Squad ammunition at 37%, the sergeant reported. 2 men wounded. 1 deceased." "Then we make it count," Helene said, and for the first time since they'd met, Thor heard something like approval in her voice. "You close your rifts, Anomaly. We'll hold the line. But if you fall to corruption, if I see even a hint of chaos taint, I execute you immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Thor said, already moving toward the nearest warp rift. Closing it was like trying to suture a wound that actively fought healing. Thor planted Stormbreaker point first into the ground and used it as a lightning rod, channeling electromagnetic energy in precise patterns that forced the rift's edges to destabilize and collapse. The warp screamed in his mind, whispered promises of power, showed him visions of Asgard restored, of Loki alive, of victories that could be his if he just surrendered. Thor ignored them all. He'd resisted the Infinity Stone's corruption. He'd held Odin's throne without falling to tyranny. He'd sacrificed his eye, his hammer, his homeworld itself in service of something greater than personal glory. The warp's temptations were crude by comparison. The first rift collapsed after 18 minutes. Behind him, Helene and the Scions fought with the desperation of those who knew they were already dead, but refused to fall without taking enemies with them. Ammunition counters hit 0. They switched to melee, chainswords and power mauls against demonic claws and impossible geometries made flesh. Another Scion died, then another. Thor finished the second rift in 16 minutes, then the third in 14. He was getting faster, understanding the warp's patterns. By the time he closed the 8th rift, only Helene, Karas, and 2 other Scions remained alive. They'd formed a back-to-back defensive circle, surrounded by demon corpses that dissolved into warp stuff even as more pressed forward. Thor closed the 9th, the 10th, the 11th. His muscles screamed. His connection to Stormbreaker felt strained, stretched thin by the constant energy channeling through an alien universe's hostile physics. Blood ran from his nose, psychic feedback from the warp's hatred manifesting as physical damage. But he kept going. 12th, 13th, 14th. Helene went down, a demon's claw punching through her power armor's back plate. She killed the demon with a point-blank bolt pistol shot even as she fell, then immediately tried to stand. Failed. Fell again. Her Vox speakers crackled with what might have been laughter or might have been dying prayers. Keep going, she managed. Close them, all. 15th, 16th. Only Karas remained standing, firing his last magazine into the demon swarm, buying seconds Thor desperately needed. And then the final rift. Thor poured everything he had remaining into closing it. Every amp of electrical power, every ounce of divine strength, every bit of stubborn Asgardian refusal to accept defeat. The rift fought him harder than all the others combined, the warp seeming to understand this was its last anchor to reality and refusing to release its grip. For 47 seconds, Thor and the warp itself fought a battle of pure will. Then, with a sound like reality sighing in relief, the final rift collapsed. The demons, suddenly cut off from their power source, began dissolving en masse. Their screams of frustration echoed across dimensions as they were forcibly returned to the immaterium. Within minutes, the battlefield fell silent except for Thor's labored breathing and the wet sounds of Helene's struggling respiration. Thor collapsed beside her, utterly spent. We did it. You did it, Helene corrected, blood bubbling at her lips. Her helmet's left lens had cracked, revealing one gray eye that studied him with new understanding. 17 rifts. Impossible, but you actually... Don't speak, Thor said, pressing his hand against her wound and calling small, precise lightning to cauterize the worst bleeding. Help will arrive soon. You'll survive this. Doesn't matter, Helene said, but her voice carried something other than resignation. I was wrong. About you. You're not just another weapon. You're... She coughed. More blood. Worthy. Thor smiled sadly. I've heard that before. From Mjolnir, from my father, from friends I've lost. But thank you, Sister Helene. You fought with honor, both you and your scions. We served the Emperor, she said, but without the usual fanatical edge. And today, he sent us you. Above them, the corrupted sky began clearing as Quintus Primus's atmosphere, no longer influenced by warp energy, started healing itself. And somewhere in the distance, Thor heard something he'd almost given up on. Human voices. Survivors. Emerging from bunkers and shelters where they'd hidden from the demonic incursion. They'd won. But as Thor sat in the blood-soaked grain field, surrounded by dying heroes and demon corpses, he understood something fundamental about the 41st millennium. Victory here didn't feel triumphant, it felt exhausting. A temporary reprieve before the next crisis, the next threat, the next impossible battle. This was what the Imperium faced every day across thousands of worlds. And suddenly, Thor understood why they'd become so brutal. The Inquisitorial frigate. Unrelenting truth maintained orbit over Quintus Primus, its scanning arrays documenting the impossible. An agri-world that should have required exterminatus now showed zero demonic activity. 17 warp rifts closed through means the Mechanicus couldn't explain. Approximately 83,000 survivors, farmers, PDF troopers, administrative personnel, emerging from shelters expecting to find their world consumed by demons, instead finding only corpses dissolving into psychic residue. And, at the center of it all, Thor Odinson, the anomaly who refused to conform to any classification the Imperium possessed. Thor stood in the Unrelenting Truth's observation deck, staring down at the world he'd saved, while medical servitors tended his wounds. The injuries were already healing, Asgardian physiology asserting itself. But the exhaustion ran deeper than mere physical damage. He'd felt the warp's malevolence directly, wrestled with dimensional forces that actively wanted to corrupt him, and emerged intact, but not unchanged. He understood now why the Imperium feared the warp so absolutely. "Battle Sister Helene will survive," Inquisitor Eisenhorn said, approaching from behind with his characteristic silent footsteps. "Apothecaries gave her 63% probability of full recovery. The others," he paused. 6 Tempestus scions dead, 2 more corrupted beyond redemption. They were granted the Emperor's mercy. But 83,000 civilians live because you refuse to accept triage logic. "You sound almost disappointed," Thor observed without turning. "On the contrary, I'm impressed and troubled." Eisenhorn moved to stand beside him at the viewport. "Do you understand what you've done, Thor Odinson? You've given desperate people hope. Word of Quintus Primus is already spreading through astropathic channels. The anomaly who closes warp rifts. The golden warrior who fights demons without corruption. Every threatened world will beg for your intervention. Every desperate commander will demand your deployment. You've made yourself into something this universe desperately needs, but cannot sustain. Cannot sustain." Thor turned to face him. "I proved it's possible to save worlds without destroying them. That's an aberration," Eisenhorn interrupted firmly. "One world, Thor. You saved one world through extraordinary effort that nearly killed you. The Imperium faces 10,000 threats simultaneously across 1,000,000 worlds. You're one being. Powerful, yes. Incorruptible, apparently. But singular. Even if you fought every day for a century, you couldn't address 1% of the crises requiring intervention." Thor's jaw clenched. "So you'd have me do nothing, except that most worlds burn because I can't save them all?" "I'd have you accept reality," Eisenhorn said, but his tone lacked its usual coldness. "The Imperium survives through brutal mathematics. 10 worlds threatened. Save 2, abandon 8, allocate resources accordingly. It's monstrous, it's necessary, and it's kept humanity alive for 10,000 years, despite enemies that should have exterminated us millennia ago." He gestured at Quintus Primus below. "You've demonstrated that miracles are possible. But miracles, by definition, cannot be systematized. They cannot be replicated. They cannot be doctrine." "Then change your doctrine," Thor said quietly. "I've seen your records, Eisenhorn. The Imperium once embraced innovation. The Great Crusade conquered the galaxy through adaptation and ambition. Your Emperor championed reason over superstition. What happened? When did survival become synonymous with stagnation?" "When the Emperor fell," Eisenhorn said bluntly. "When Horus betrayed him and plunged the Imperium into civil war. When we learned that innovation without caution opens doorways to chaos. When we discovered that ambition unchecked leads to damnation." He turned to face Thor fully. "You want to know what happened? Hope became too dangerous, because hope makes people question orders. Hope makes soldiers hesitate before executing the corrupted. Hope makes commanders delay necessary exterminatus orders. And in the 41st millennium, that hesitation kills billions." "You're wrong," Thor said. "Hope is what makes survival worthwhile. Without it, you're just existing, prolonging agony rather than building towards something better." "Perhaps," Eisenhorn admitted. "But I didn't summon you here for philosophy. I summoned you because you've attracted attention, the highest levels of Imperial authority." He activated a holo projector, and suddenly the observation deck filled with the image of Terra, humanity's throne world, seat of the Emperor's palace. The hololithic display focused on the inquisitorial conclave chambers, where 12 figures in elaborate robes and power armor debated Thor's fate. Their voices, transmitted across light years via astropathic relay, crackled with distortion but carried unmistakable authority. Cannot allow an unclassified entity this much operational freedom, one inquisitor argued. He claims godhood, wields powers that should corrupt him, violates doctrine with every action. He's a walking heresy regardless of his effectiveness. His effectiveness is precisely why we cannot execute him, another countered. 17 warp rifts closed, 0 corruption. If we can replicate his methods require being a literal god from another dimension, a third snapped. We cannot replicate Thor Odinson any more than we can replicate the Emperor himself. The question isn't whether he's useful. The question is whether he's controllable. Thor listened with growing unease. They spoke about him as though he were a weapon to be maintained or discarded, not a person with agency. They've been arguing for 6 hours, Eisenhorn said quietly. The Ordo Malleus wants to dissect you, determine if your corruption resistance can be extracted and weaponized. The Ordo Hereticus wants you executed. They consider your existence theological contamination. The Ordo Xenos wants you contained and studied. Only the Ordo Kronos suggested something different, which is, give you a choice. Eisenhorn met his gaze. Serve the Imperium willingly as an independent agent, bound by oaths but not by chains. Deploy against threats the Imperium cannot otherwise address. Operate with autonomy in exchange for results. It's unprecedented. But then, so are you. And if I refuse, Thor asked, they'll attempt to neutralize you. Won't succeed, you're far too powerful. But they'll try. You'll become a hunted fugitive in a universe that already wants you dead. Eventually, you'll either fall to chaos seeking allies, or you'll be worn down through attrition and killed. Eisenhorn's expression softened fractionally. I've seen it happen to others who tried to remain independent. This universe doesn't permit neutrality, Thor. You're either with the Imperium, against it, or consumed by forces that care nothing for your principles. Thor turned back to the viewport, watching Quintus Primus rotate slowly below. 83,000 people lived there now, because he'd refused to accept the Imperium's calculus. How many other worlds could he save? How many lives preserved if he had the Imperium's resources behind him? But at what cost? Serving an empire built on atrocity and justified through theological certainty. Becoming another weapon in the arsenal of an inquisition that burned first and investigated never. Tell me honestly, Thor said, if I swear service to your Imperium, will they permit me to operate according to my principles? To seek alternatives before accepting civilian casualties? To question orders that violate honor? Eisenhorn was silent for a long moment. No, he finally admitted. They'll give you autonomy in tactics, but not in strategic goals. When the Imperium orders a world burned, you'll be expected to comply or be branded traitor. When innocents must die to prevent greater corruption, you'll be expected to accept it. They'll use your power, Thor, but they'll demand your conscience in payment. Then I cannot serve them. I suspected as much. Eisenhorn nodded slowly. Which brings us to the real reason I summoned you here. He deactivated the hololithic display and lowered his voice. There are factions within the Imperium, small, careful, hidden even from the Inquisition's eyes, who remember what the Emperor truly wanted. Not an empire of faith, but one of reason. Not stagnation masked as stability, but genuine progress. These factions cannot openly oppose Imperial doctrine without facing execution, but they work in shadows, preserving forbidden knowledge, questioning dogma, seeking alternatives. Thor's eyes narrowed. You're one of them. I am a pragmatist, Eisenhorn corrected. I serve the Emperor's vision, not the Ecclesiarchy's interpretation of it. And and I believe you represent something the Imperium desperately needs. Proof that power and principle aren't mutually exclusive, that corruption can be resisted, that there are alternatives to the brutal mathematics we've accepted as gospel. He pulled a data slate from his robes. This contains coordinates, safe worlds where you can operate independently, contacts within the Imperium who share my perspective, resources that can support you without official sanction. You're asking me to become a rogue element, Thor said. I'm asking you to be exactly what you've always been, a hero who fights for something better. Eisenhorn pressed the data slate into Thor's hand. The Imperium will declare you renegade within 48 hours. They'll send kill teams, but if you're careful, if you choose your battles wisely, you can survive. And every world you save, every miracle you perform, erodes the certainty that atrocity is the only answer. Thor stared at the data slate, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. Accept it, and he became a fugitive in a hostile universe. Refuse it, and he'd be forced to either serve an empire he couldn't respect or flee to regions unknown, abandoning millions who needed protection. There was no good choice, just degrees of terrible compromise. But wasn't that what heroism meant? Not choosing between perfect options, but accepting imperfect ones and making them work through sheer determination. I'll take your offer, Thor said finally. But understand this, Eisenhorn. I won't just save worlds. I'll demonstrate that your Imperium's methods aren't the only ones that work. I'll prove that mercy and effectiveness aren't contradictory. And maybe, some of your people will remember what they're actually fighting for. Eisenhorn smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. The Emperor protects Thor Odinson, but perhaps he protects through agents we never expected. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Battle's sister Helene asked to speak with you before you depart. She's in the Medicae bay. Thor found Helene propped against medical pillows, her torso wrapped in regenerative bandages, and her augmetics slowly rebuilding damaged tissue. She looked small without her power armor, just a middle-aged woman with scars and augmetic ports and eyes that had witnessed too much horror. You're leaving, she said without preamble. Eisenhorn told me. Going rogue. I am, Thor confirmed. I cannot serve an empire that demands I abandon my principles, but I won't abandon those who need protection. Good, Helene said, surprising him. The Imperium needs people like you, people who refuse, who question, who remember that we're supposed to be protecting humanity, not just preserving its corpse. She struggled to sit up straighter. I've served the Ordo Hereticus for 43 years. I've burned heretics, purged cultists, executed the corrupt without hesitation, and I believed, truly believed, it was necessary. That mercy was weakness, that every compromise was a step toward damnation. And now, Thor asked gently, now I've fought beside someone who closed 17 warp rifts without falling to corruption, who saved 83,000 people the Imperium had already condemned, who proved that miracles are possible if you're stubborn enough to attempt them. She met his gaze. You've given me something I haven't felt in decades, anomaly. You've given me doubt. And in the 41st millennium, doubt is the first step toward thinking. Thor smiled. Doubt is also dangerous, sister. Your Inquisition won't appreciate questions. Let them disapprove, Helene said, with a ghost of her old steel. I've earned the right to my own conclusions. And my conclusion is this. You're not an anomaly that needs correcting. You're proof that we've been correcting wrong. She extended her hand, the organic one, not the augmetic. The Emperor protects Thor of Asgard, but today you protected better than he has in millennia. Don't let them break you. Thor clasped her hand gently. I won't. And perhaps, sister, You'll find ways to make the Imperium better from within. Question orders, seek alternatives. Remember that the people you protect are ends, not means. Perhaps, she agreed. Now go, before someone with less conflicted loyalties decides to execute you for heresy. Thor departed the unrelenting truth via a commandeered Aquila lander, setting course for the first coordinates Eisenhorn had provided. Behind him, the inquisitorial frigate transmitted official reports. Anomaly Thor Odinson declared renegade, wanted for questioning, considered dangerous, but not irredeemably corrupt. It was, Thor reflected, the most honest assessment the Imperium had given him. As he piloted through the void, Stormbreaker resting against the co-pilot's seat, Thor felt the weight of his choice. He was alone in a hostile universe, hunted by the very empire he'd tried to help, facing threats that could corrupt or kill him at any moment. No Avengers to call for backup, no Asgard to return to, no allies except scattered rebels who might betray him if politics shifted. But he'd saved 83,000 people, proved that alternatives existed, planted seeds of doubt in minds that accepted atrocity as inevitable. And sometimes, seeds were enough. The 41st millennium ground onward with its usual indifference to individual fate, but something had shifted, a hairline fracture in the Imperium's certainty that brutality was the only language the universe understood. Thor Odinson, god of thunder, and now renegade of the Imperium, carved a path through the darkness that others would whisper about in secret. He appeared on worlds marked for exterminatus and saved them through impossible effort. He closed warp rifts that should have consumed entire systems. He fought demons with lightning and honor, proving repeatedly that corruption could be resisted through will alone. The Inquisition hunted him. Chaos sought to claim him. Xenos factions studied him with wary curiosity. He remained uncorrupted, unbowed, unbroken. On distant Forge worlds, tech priests quietly began researching electromagnetic warp disruption, inspired by fragmented reports of the Thunder Anomaly's methods. Within the Ordo Chronos, debates sparked about whether the Imperium's strategic doctrine required revision, not wholesale change, but acknowledgement that alternatives existed beyond the binary of salvation through genocide. Battle Sister Helene returned to active duty, carrying questions she'd never dared ask before, and found others who shared her doubts. The Imperium would not change overnight. Perhaps it would never truly change. 10,000 years of accumulated dogma couldn't be overturned by one outsider's defiance. But Thor had never sought to overthrow empires, only to prove that better paths existed for those brave enough to seek them. Somewhere in the void between stars, Thor Odinson piloted his borrowed Aquila lander toward the next crisis, the next impossible battle, the next world that needed someone willing to fight for something more than mere survival. Stormbreaker crackled with anticipation. Lightning gathered in the eternal storm that followed him now, a localized tempest that seemed to exist wherever the god of thunder traveled. He was alone. He was hunted. He was impossibly far from home. But he was worthy. And in the 41st millennium, where gods demanded blood sacrifice and empires measured progress in acceptable casualties, one being still fought for the radical notion that people were worth saving, not because they were useful, not because they were strategically valuable, but simply because they were people. The darkness was vast, the threats were endless. The Imperium would never truly trust him. But Thor had faced Ragnarok itself and emerged victorious. He'd held the full fury of a star and survived. He'd stood against Thanos when half the universe fell to dust. The 41st millennium was brutal. It was hopeless. It was designed to crush idealism beneath the grinding necessity of survival. Thor smiled as lightning danced across his fingertips. He'd always enjoyed a challenge. Behind him, on 17 worlds marked for death, people lived who shouldn't have. In shadows throughout the Imperium, minds questioned dogma that had gone unexamined for millennia. And in the warp itself, that dimension of pure malevolence, something noticed the anomaly who refused corruption and marked him as a threat to be eliminated. The war for the 41st millennium's soul had begun, not with armies or fleets, but with one god's stubborn refusal to accept that atrocity was inevitable. In the end, Thor Odinson would not save the Imperium. That was never his purpose. But he would remind it, through deed and defiance, what it meant to be worth saving. And perhaps, centuries hence, historians would mark this moment as the first crack in the certainty that had calcified humanity's empire into a monument to fear. The Emperor protects, the faithful proclaimed. But on this day, Thor had protected better. And that made all the difference. The Emperor protects. More stories await.